grew up in a small town, right on the edge of the Arkansas-Missouri border, the kind of place with more churches than gas stations, and where people still wave when they pass you on the dirt road. I left after high school and never really looked back. Too many bad memories tied to that place. But about a year ago, I came back for a funeral. My childhood friend, Mason, had lost his dad. After the service, we ended up grabbing a few beers and driving around like we used to. You know, windows down, radio low, letting the summer wind do most of the talking. Somewhere along the way, we turned down an old country road I hadn't thought about in years. "You remember the Danner place?" Mason asked. I did. It was one of those local stories every kid knew. An old shack out in the woods where some drunk hermit supposedly lived until he disappeared back in the 90s. No one ever found him, just his truck parked outside, keys still in the ignition. Naturally, we all turned it into a dare spot in high school, but I never actually went inside. Mason grinned like he knew what I was thinking. "You never stepped foot in that place, did you?" "No," I admitted. "You did though, didn't you?" "Yeah, once. Didn't go far. Chickened out." He turned down a side road that had almost been completely overtaken by weeds and tree limbs. The deeper we went, the more the headlights caught the soft glitter of old beer bottles and shotgun shells buried in the mud. Finally, the shack came into view, sagging, half choked by kudzu, with the porch still clinging on by a couple of nails in stubborn memory. We stepped out and killed the headlights. The air was thick with humidity and honeysuckle. Not a sound but the cicadas and the slow creak of a wind-blown shutter tapping against the wall. "Let's check it out," Mason said. I didn't want to, not really, but there was something about being back home, like the old peer pressure never really left you. So I followed him through the overgrowth and up the warped porch steps. He pushed the door open without hesitation. Inside, it smelled like mold and rat piss. The floor was rotted in spots and every footstep threatened to go straight through. Empty cans lined the counter, some modern, some old enough to be rusted solid. A broken-down recliner sat dead center, and beside it, a pile of ash and a half-collapsed fireplace. Mason moved with the confidence of someone used to creeping through places like this. I kept close behind, squinting at every shadow. That's when I noticed the rug, a heavy braided thing in the corner, out of place in a house with nothing else but rotten dust. I stepped toward it, and the boards groaned louder than anywhere else in the room. Mason looked at me. "That wasn't here before." We rolled it back. Underneath was a square cutout in the floor, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. The kind of thing you'd miss unless you were standing right on it. There was a metal ring bolted into one side. "Is that a trapdoor?" I asked. We rolled it back. Mason crouched, ran his fingers under the edge and pulled. The wood resisted like it hadn't been moved in years. Then it gave way with a wet snap and a gust of air spilled out. Cooler than the room, but sour and wet smelling. Like a root cellar that hadn't breathed in decades. There was a staircase, wooden, narrow, leading into pitch black. Mason pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight and aimed it down. "Holy shit," he whispered. "There's a whole basement." "No way that's up to code," I said, trying to keep it light. He grinned. "You going down?" I hesitated, then nodded. The stairs groaned but held our weight. The air got colder with every step. The smell intensified. Something earthy with a faint hint of something metallic. When we hit the bottom, I instantly regretted coming down. The room was bigger than I expected. Cement floor, brick walls, the remains of a workbench along one side, shelves lined with old cans and boxes. And in the far corner, something that didn't fit the rest of the space. a metal folding chair. Directly across from it, an old VHS camcorder mounted on a tripod. It was pointed straight at the chair. Mason whispered, "What the hell?" We walked closer. The camera was off, but the red sticker on the side had a date stamped in faded marker. 2001. The chair looked used. The floor beneath it was scuffed, like something heavy had been dragged across it more than once. And beside the chair, almost hidden in the shadow, was a pair of rusted shackles bolted into the wall. I turned in a slow circle, stomach tightening. The walls were lined with shelves, and tucked between dusty jars and broken tools were tapes. VHS tapes, each labeled by hand with masking tape. Mason grabbed one. "They're numbered," he said. "This one says number 18, 4/17/01. "Put it back," I said, suddenly uneasy. "Why would someone need this setup?" he asked. "This is like some Silence of the Lambs shit." "I don't want to know," I said. Then I saw something in the corner, a box of clothing. At least, I thought it was clothing until I noticed how small the shirts were. They were child-sized. Something cracked above us. We both jumped. The house groaned, but it sounded like more than just wind. Like something had shifted. Something that knew we were here. "We need to go," I said. Mason nodded, and we bolted up the stairs. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if that chair was still empty. We didn't talk much after that, just got in the truck and left. The silence between us was louder than the cicadas ever were. Later that night, I told Mason we should call someone. Police, sheriff's department, hell, even a local journalist. But he shook his head. "You think anyone's going to believe we didn't plant that stuff ourselves?" he said. "Even if they did, that place has probably been like that for 20 years. You think the Boone County Sheriff's Office is going to drop everything to chase VHS tapes in a hole no one's supposed to know about?" I didn't have an answer. A few days later, I was back home, hours away. I called the local non-emergency line anyway. Left a vague tip about an abandoned structure off County Road 12. Possible criminal history. Might be worth checking out. I didn't leave a name or a callback number, just a voice on a machine. I never heard anything about it again. A couple months after that, I got a text from Mason out of the blue. He said, "Place got torn down. No record it was even on the county parcel maps. Weird, right?" I asked if he had told anyone. Nope, didn't want to be involved. He never brought it up again, and I never pressed. Some nights I think about those tapes. I wonder who's on them. Wonder if anyone's family is still out there looking for a face that's been buried under a rug in a shack no one's supposed to remember. And sometimes I wonder who tore it down so fast, and why. I don't usually post stories like this online, but I've been carrying this weight for months now, and it's starting to feel like I'm suffocating. I went home to the Ozarks a while back to help my dad clean out the attic of the old farmhouse. My mom passed away a couple years ago, and the house has been mostly empty since. Dad's getting old, he's in his 70s, and I figured it was time to sort through decades of stuff before it all got tossed. The attic was worse than I expected. There were stacks of dusty boxes, trunks packed tight with old clothes, brittle newspapers, and faded photographs. Everything smelled like mothballs in time. As I was digging through a trunk near the far wall, I found a thick, leather-bound journal hidden under some blankets. The leather was cracked and the pages yellowed, but it was in surprisingly good shape. What stopped me was the handwriting. It wasn't Dad's, but whoever wrote it knew this place like the back of their hand. The journal was full of notes on a series of disappearances around Cedar Lake. which is about 5 miles from the farm. People who vanished without a trace over the last 40 years. There were names, dates, and locations. Some looked like coordinates. Others were just cryptic notes referencing the old pier or the hollow by the sycamore. They were also pasted in newspaper clippings, most too faded to read easily. When I asked Dad about it, he went silent for a long time. Then he told me to forget about it. Small town gossip, legends, nothing worth digging into. But when I pushed, his eyes darkened and his hands trembled just a bit. He admitted he had his suspicions, but said it was best to leave the past alone. I could tell there was more he wasn't saying, but I didn't push. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so one night, I drove down to Cedar Lake alone. The air was thick with fog and the water was black and still. I walked down to the shoreline near the old boat launch. That's when I saw it. A small memorial made of wildflowers tied with faded ribbon, a couple of half-burned candles, and some stones arranged in a circle. The hair on the back of my neck raised like I was being watched. My eyes darted back and forth as I scanned the tree line, but I saw nothing. The only sound was the quiet lapping of the water and the distant hoot of an owl. I stayed until the candles burned out, then headed back. Back at the house, things started to change. Dad became quieter, more withdrawn. One evening, I caught him talking on the phone in hushed tones. When I asked who it was, he said, "Just an old friend." But he looked like he wanted to say more. Later, I found a folded note on the porch with no writing on it, just blank paper. Then there were the boots. A pair of worn leather boots caked with mud appeared outside the barn. They weren't ours, and no one in the family wore that size. When I asked Dad, he shrugged it off, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes. I couldn't make out if it was unease, fear, or guilt. One night I stayed up late going through the journal again. Between the clippings, I found a list of names, including one that looked eerily like Dad's childhood friend, someone who had vanished in the late 80s. There were notes next to his name: last seen near the pier, unexplained disappearance. The more I read, the less I understood. Was Dad trying to solve these cases? Was he protecting someone? Or was he involved in things darker than I ever imagined? I decided to confront him one morning. We stood on the porch, the sun cutting through the mist. I asked him straight, "Did you have something to do with this? With any of it?" He looked at me, eyes steady but distant. "Some secrets aren't mine to tell," he said. "Sometimes it's safer to watch and wait than to act. You need to decide what you're willing to carry." The next day, I found a small key taped under the kitchen table. It didn't fit any locks in the house, so I went and tried it on the old cellar door beneath the back porch. It clicked open. Inside, the cellar was dry but smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic. There was an old rifle case and several dusty bottles, some broken, some full. On the floor, I saw fresh footprints leading to a trap door covered by a loose board. I wanted to lift it to see what lay beneath, but I didn't. I put the key back and shut the door. I don't know if my dad was trying to protect those who disappeared, or if he was hiding something darker. Maybe he's just a man caught between his past and a town full of silence. I left the journal and key behind when I left, but sometimes I think the house holds its own secrets, and maybe I'm not done carrying them. When my Uncle Roy died, all I inherited was a broken-down cabin and a tin of old coins hidden behind the wood stove. The coins were worthless, the cabin barely more, but I took it anyway. After my divorce, I didn't have a lot of options. Couldn't afford to stay in Springfield. and didn't want to move in with my sister, so I came here, to a patch of Ozark mountains thick with dogwood and decay, where even the power lines looked like they gave up years ago. The cabin sat about 100 yards from the only neighbor in sight, a sloped 2-story farmhouse half hidden in overgrowth. I never saw a light on, didn't see smoke either. First couple days I figured it was abandoned. Then I heard the digging. It started the third night, just past midnight, shovel and dirt, slow, methodical, like someone was pacing themselves. I stood at my window with the lights off, trying to make out movement between the trees. But it was dark out here, darker than I was used to. All I could see was the faintest rhythm of motion, just enough to know it was coming from the neighbor's lot. By morning, the yard looked untouched. I went to the general store down by the highway that afternoon, a place called Jackie's Stop, though I never saw anyone named Jackie. I asked the cashier, a guy about my age in a Bass Pro hat, if he knew the man who lived next door. He paused, then grabbed a can of dip from the shelf behind him. "Which cabin you in?" he asked. "The one up off Dry Creek Road, white shack with a dented mailbox." He didn't answer right away, just let out a breath like he'd heard that one before. "You're up by Colburn's place," he said finally. "At least it used to be." "Used to be?" He looked down at the counter, then back at me. "Folks up that way don't tend to stay long, not in that stretch." "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged like it wasn't his story to tell. "I mean, it's quiet out there. Some say too quiet." The digging kept happening, always after midnight, always slow, and always done by the time the sun came up. I'd walk to the edge of the property in the morning and look for evidence, but the grass always looked the same, like nothing had ever disturbed it. Then, on the 6th night, I finally saw him. A tall, narrow man, maybe in his 60s, wearing dark suspenders and a brimmed cap. He had a miner's lantern strapped to his forehead, light bouncing wildly every time he lifted the shovel. He worked with a strange rhythm, not just digging, but stopping every so often to lean down. It looked like he was listening, not to the ground, but to the hole. The next morning, I crossed the property line and went looking for it. No sign of a fresh dig site, no pile of dirt, not even disturbed leaves. A week later, I tried to introduce myself. He was sitting on the porch when I approached, just past sunset. He didn't wave, he didn't nod, just stared as I walked up the path with a 6-pack in my hand. When I offered it, he didn't move. He only looked at it like I'd handed him something dead. "Oh, sorry," I said. I just moved in. Place was my uncle's." No reply. "You know, I've been hearing some kind of work going on over here at night. You need help with anything?" Still nothing. His skin looked weathered, like he'd spent more time underground than above it. His eyes were cloudy and pale. I wasn't even sure he could see me. I set the 6-pack on the step and backed away. "All right, well, nice to meet you." I'd barely turned around when I heard the bottle caps clink as he pulled one loose. Back at Jackie's Stop, I asked again. A different guy was working the counter this time. Old man with cloudy glasses and a voice like gravel. I mentioned the neighbor and asked if anyone had ever really talked to him. The man didn't hesitate in his reply. "That used to be the Miller property. Before that, someone named Krantz. Before that, I don't remember. But I remember all 3 of them left without selling. Just vanished. Car still parked. Even food in the fridge." "Police ever do anything?" I asked. "They came out once or twice, took statements. Nothing came of it. Maybe they didn't want anything to come of it." I pressed a little harder. "What about the man there now?" The old man looked out the window and said, "Don't think he ever left." A few days later, I got bold, waited until late at night when I heard the sound again, dug out the pair of binoculars I'd brought from Springfield and took position behind the old woodpile at the edge of the property. The man was out again, bent low, shovel in hand. But something was different. He wasn't digging, not this time. He was covering something back up. I caught the faint glint of metal and dirt. A long object. Could have been a pipe. Could have been a blade. Could have been a damn arm for all I know. He shoveled with urgency now, looking over his shoulder between every scoop. Not like someone finishing a job, but like someone who'd been caught. I was still watching when he stopped suddenly, turned and looked straight at me. The light from his headlamp hit my binocular lens dead on. I ducked, heart pounding. I didn't dare to peek again. The next morning, there was a dead rabbit on my porch. I called the county sheriff that afternoon, told him I was hearing strange activity, that I was concerned someone might be digging up graves or burying something they shouldn't be. The deputy they sent out was polite but disinterested. He walked the neighbor's lot, asked a few questions, and told me, "It's just an old man keeping to himself. There's nothing illegal about digging." I asked if he checked what he was digging. "He's got a bunch of old metal detectors and survey maps in the house. Says he's searching for old well lines or buried iron. There used to be a church foundation up that way," he says. "And you believe that?" The deputy shrugged. "Well, he's not hurting anybody." Weeks passed. The noises never stopped. Some nights I'd hear muttering. Other nights I swore I heard something else, like scraping from beneath the soil. I didn't sleep much after that. Started writing things down. Dates, times, and patterns. Tried to map where on the property the digging sounded loudest. It felt stupid, but I couldn't stop. I told myself I was being rational, that if something was going on, I'd need proof. I even bought a cheap drone from a pawn shop in West Plains and flew it over the neighbor's property. The camera was garbage, but on one pass, I caught something odd. A rectangular patch of dirt, lighter than the surrounding area, and about 10 feet long. When I checked the footage again that night, the patch was gone. I never did go over there, not because I was scared, at least not in the traditional sense, but because I couldn't think of a single reason that didn't make me sound like a lunatic. What would I say? "Hi, sorry to bother you, just wondering why you dig holes every night and never talk to anyone." It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. So I kept watching, and the days kept sliding by like wet leaves in a creek. I'd go into town every few days for groceries, just to see other faces. The guy at the general store eventually stopped asking how I was settling in, like he already knew the answer. And the neighbor kept digging. Sometimes he'd stop for a night or two, then resume again, just as methodically. Always around the same time, always in a different part of his property, never using the same hole twice. I marked the locations on a map once just to see if there was a pattern. If there was, I wasn't smart enough to see it. And then, one morning, I realized it had been quiet. Not just one night, but 3 in a row. No lantern light, no scraping, no slow, rhythmic thud of the shovel. I watched for signs of life that day. The truck was still there, sitting on bald tires. The curtains were still drawn. By the 5th quiet night, I walked to the edge of the property line and stood there, just out of sight. There was no sound. The digging stopped, and I don't know why. Maybe he finished what he was doing. Maybe he found what he was looking for. I used to run night freight through the Ozarks, mostly by choice. There was less traffic, fewer way stations, and a kind of peace you don't find in the daylight. Highway 65 was a regular route for me. It was straight enough and quiet enough, but there's a different kind of quiet in the Ozarks. Not silence, more like the land is listening. This happened about 5 years ago, late October. I had left Springfield around 1:45 a.m., tank full and thermos loaded. My drop was in Harrison, Arkansas. I figured I'd push through the fog and get a few hours at the truck stop on the south end of town. The stretch, just past the Hercules Glades Wilderness area, is where things got weird. I'd slowed down to around 45. Dense fog laying across the pavement, like someone poured it out of a bucket. It clung to the road, swallowing my light, making the trees look closer than they were. Every shadow had weight. Every bend felt tighter than it should have been. That's when it stepped out, from the left side, out of the trees, like it knew the exact timing. Not a lunge, not a scramble, just a quick, purposeful stride. First thought was deer, maybe a tall one mid-leap. But this wasn't a deer. It walked on two legs, smooth and confident. It was tall like one of those NBA guys, maybe 6.5 feet. Thin frame, long arms that swung a little too slow. Shoulders set wide. And its head, small like it didn't match the rest of the body. I couldn't see eyes, not in that fog. But the thing never turned, never acknowledged me, just moved across like it had done it 100 times before. The weirdest part was how efficient it was. No wasted motion, no hesitation, like it knew how fast I was going and how long it had to clear the road. It never broke stride. I hit the brakes out of instinct, not slamming them, but enough to feel the jolt in my gut. My headlights caught it fully as it passed. Gray-brown skin, maybe even leathery. Not shiny and no fur. It looked raw, like it belonged out there. And then it was gone, back into the trees on the other side. No pause, no sound, just gone. I sat there idling for a solid minute, hands still on the wheel, heart thumping like it almost hit a person. Eventually I climbed out, flashlight in hand, walked up and down the shoulder. The leaves were thick from the season, so I didn't expect prints, but I still looked. There were no drag marks, no blood, no crash sounds in the brush, just fog and trees and a stillness that didn't feel natural. That was the part that stayed with me, how quiet it all sounded. Even the engine felt too loud, like it was the only thing alive out there. I got back in the cab and kept driving. I didn't tell anyone, not at the truck stop, not my dispatcher, not even my brother, who's usually the first person I'd call when something weird happens. People hear Ozarks and think hill folk or Bigfoot or meth heads wandering in the woods. This wasn't any of that. It wasn't wild-eyed or crazy. It wasn't a joke or some guy in a suit. It was something else entirely. I've driven that stretch a dozen times since, never seen it again, but I still think about it, especially around that same curve, near the tree line, where the road drops a little and the trees crowd in. Sometimes I think about how it didn't care that I was there, didn't hurry, didn't even react, like I wasn't worth noticing. That's the part that gets me. It wasn't afraid. It was just used to moving at night. I went up into the Boston Mountains for 5 days with nothing but a ruck, my dog, and the idea that I needed to clear my head. The trail I picked wasn't on any map, just a worn footpath a friend marked on my topo, tucked between switchbacks like someone wanted it hidden. I was maybe 3 hours from the truck when I realized we hadn't passed another soul. That's rare in August. My dog, Jet, is part shepherd, part something else. Normally he stays close, ears up, happy to keep watch. But that first night after I pitched camp in a little saddle between ridges, he wouldn't settle down. He just stood there facing the woods with his hackles up. Didn't bark, only stared. At dawn, I found a bundle sitting just outside the tent flap. It looked like someone had stacked stones into a little cairn. 4 perfectly round river rocks balanced on a chunk of driftwood, tied together with twine that looked handmade. I thought maybe Jet dug it up, but it was clean. The twine was still taut. I left it where it was. The second night, I camped near a dry creek bed. Jet circled the tent 3 times before lying down, still watching the woods. Around midnight, I heard leaves crunch not that far off. It wasn't an animal, too slow and measured. Jet didn't growl, just pressed his weight against my legs. In the morning, there was a feather bundle where the fire pit had been. 6 feathers wrapped in bark with tiny beads woven into the strand holding them. They were old beads, handmade. I don't know how else to say it, but they smelled like dust and copper. By the 3rd night, I started to get the feeling I wasn't being stalked. I was being studied. Watched, sure, but not with hunger. More like with interest. I started thinking about those old stories, the ones the locals only tell after a drink. About how people who went into the hills and never came back. About the ones who did and couldn't explain what they'd seen. I moved camp again, deeper this time, thinking maybe I could lose whatever was tracking us. On the 4th night, no gifts came. Jet finally slept. I almost believed it was over. But the 5th morning, when I crawled out of the tent, my pack was gone. In its place, someone had left a coil of rope, a rusted knife with a bone handle, and a jar of what looked like rendered fat sealed with wax. Jet sat by it, ears back. I swear he looked apologetic. I carried the jar back to the truck in my hands like it was a warning, or maybe an invitation. That was 2 years ago. I still don't know what they wanted. I still don't know if I said yes. You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radeon production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.